The start of the college basketball season is here, and the next managing editor and Ivy League beat writer Jenn Hatfield is here to chat all about who is predicted to be at the top of the conference, who is expected to compete for the fourth spot in the Ivy League tournament, Cornell's new head coach, and what Jen's looking forward to this season and some things to keep an eye out for. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Monday and happy start of the college basketball season. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On NBA Daily Newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com and start your day with the all-new free Locked On NBA newsletter. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, including the two of us. So get that YouTube subscription up, and you can also support us by subscribing to The Next for $9 a month or $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll chat all about who's predicted to be at the top of the Ivy League, who's expected to compete for the fourth spot in the Ivy League tournament, Cornell's new head coach, and what Jen's looking forward to this season, and some things to keep an eye out for. All because joining me today is The Next's managing editor and Ivy League beat writer, Jenn Hatfield. So, Jenn, thank you for joining me. The Ivy League basketball season tips off in just a few hours, so I have to ask, both Princeton and Columbia lost some key pieces last season. How good are they expected to be?
Hi, Natalie. So excited to be back with you. Happy season opener. What a great time of year it is. The short answer to your question is very good. Both Princeton and Columbia were picked atop the preseason poll in the Ivy League. Princeton was picked first. Columbia was picked second. So both teams are still expected to be really good. There are just maybe a few more question marks about each team than we've had in the past couple seasons based on some key losses for both teams, which I can get into more in a bit if you want. But, you know, Columbia returns a little bit more than Princeton does, but you can bet on two great coaches, Princeton's Carla Berube and Columbia's Megan Griffith, to figure it out with their respective teams and have both teams in contention for a regular season title and Ivy tournament titles.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get into who some of those key losses are before we get into some of the newcomers that might help replacing them?
Yeah, so Princeton lost a trio of seniors who graduated. Point guard Caitlin Chen is now playing her graduate year at UConn because the Ivy League doesn't allow graduate students. Starting forward, Ellie Mitchell, the program's all-time leading rebounder, graduated and is out of eligibility. And then senior forward Chet Nweke also graduated and is playing her graduate year at Georgetown. So three key players all played vital minutes and were really, you know, the heart and soul of this Princeton program over the last several years. So really their losses go beyond their statistical contributions, and their statistical contributions were huge. So there are some holes that younger players are going to need to fill. And then for Columbia, it's kind of all concentrated in the loss of Abby Shue, who was the program's all-time leading scorer, the third highest all-time scorer in Ivy League women's basketball. Was drafted by the Connecticut Sun, is currently playing overseas in Belgium. So that's one big loss to Princeton's three, but both are kind of earthquakes for their respective programs to fill the shoes of.
And then who are some of the newcomers and who do you expect to just generally step up and fill some of the statistical categories that were lost in those losses that you mentioned?
Yeah, so for Princeton, I have my eye on some sophomores. Ashley Chia is going to step in all likelihood in the starting spot, that point guard role. Actually played a year with Caitlin Chen as her high school teammate. So is used to filling the shoes of Caitlin Chen. So I expect that to be a pretty seamless transition. Sky Belker started last year as a freshman, and we can expect her to kind of take that sophomore leap, I would think. And then Mari Bickley is another guard who will probably come off the bench like she did last year. Could fill in some at the point, can also play off the ball, is super athletic. And I think she's just going to kind of make a jump too as she kind of figures it out. So keep an eye on some of those sophomores. And then also in the front court, there's a lot of minutes up for grabs in the front court in particular with Mitchell and Nweke gone. And I think the player to watch there is going to be junior Tabby Amanze, who missed most of the past 2 years with injuries, but was a top 50 recruit when she came in. So if she can stay healthy, I think she would be a player to watch to have a breakout junior season. And then on Columbia's side, I think there's another sophomore guard you want to watch over there. That would be Riley Weiss. Megan Griffiths said last year that she expected Riley to be the next great shooter in Columbia women's basketball history, which no pressure, Riley. But I think Weiss is ready to kind of assume that mantle and step up in that way. And then keep an eye on senior Cecilia Collins and Kitty Henderson, who were kind of rounding out the Columbia's big three with Shu last year. And I think both are really ready to step up and really, I think either could jump into contention for Ivy Player of the Year. It's just a matter of, which one and all that goes into those Player of the Year races. But I think both of them will make leaps as well.
And then Harvard has been the 3 seed in the last 2 Ivy League tournaments. Do you think they can win the title?
I do. I think this is more than a Princeton-Columbia race. We've seen Princeton and Columbia share the last 2 regular season titles. So a lot of folks who don't follow the league super closely, either think this is Princeton's league, which is not entirely false given their streak of titles, or they think it's Princeton and Columbia's league based on recent history. But the league is so much deeper than that. And I really think that Harvard can challenge and potentially win the title. They bring back the most minutes and points of any team in the league. They're very experienced. They're led by senior guard Harmony Turner, who is the only first-team All-Ivy player from last season back. So, what I would say is the favorite right now for Ivy League Player of the Year. They've got 2 veteran post players in senior Elena Rodriguez and junior Katie Krupa, who, number one, complement Harmony Turner really well, but also just give the Crimson kind of an inside force that some of the rest of the league, including Princeton and Columbia, are still trying to figure out. So, and then they've got some exciting young players too. So just really excited to see, how they put all the pieces together and how they can kind of shake up this race for folks who maybe are used to Princeton and Columbia running the show.
And who are some pieces that will help them do that? And are there any potentials for a breakout star?
Yeah, so Harvard brought in a pretty big freshman class, 5 players. One of them, the one that probably most people have heard of, is Hannah Belibi, who was a top 100 recruit, sister of Fran Belibi, the former Stanford star. But Harvard head coach Carrie Moore said there are actually a couple freshmen who may play more than Belibi right away, because Belibi is kind of blocked by Rodriguez and Krupa right now, and we'll have to kind of figure out where she can get minutes behind such a veteran duo. So on the perimeter, I think the name that you all should know is freshman point guard Lydia Hatira. She's Greek. She's played on the national team. She's ready to go. The coaches have been really, really excited with what she's been doing on both ends, how she's been picking up the offense, how she's been playing defensively. Moore said that Hatira kind of gives them a different presence defensively on the perimeter than they've had in a while. And so that's going to allow Turner to play more off the ball and focus on her scoring and not have to run the offense and set up all her teammates and make sure they're all in the right positions as much. She can just kind of get it and go. So I'm really excited to see that combination.
And coming up next, we'll chat about who's expected to compete for the 4th spot in the Ivy League tournament, as well as Cornell's new head coach and more. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I just want to get started by thanking my wonderful husband. This month is all about gratitude, and along with the person I just shouted out, there's another person we don't get to thank enough: ourselves. Going to therapy has been so helpful for me, especially as I've gone through a lot of events, life transitions, and just stuff over the last year. I've learned so many positive coping skills as well as how to set boundaries. It's also empowered me to be the best version of myself and overall just kinder to myself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So for the listeners that don't know, the Ivy League tournament is just the top 4 teams in the standings when the regular season ends. So what other teams or do you expect to contend for the Ivy League tournament, and can you break those teams down for us?
Sure. So the way I look at it, it's kind of a 2-team race for that 4th spot. I expect Princeton, Columbia, and Harvard to all make the tournament fairly comfortably, not to be sweating it out too much. And I think Brown and Penn are the 2 teams who will probably end up fighting it out for that 4th spot, just as they did last year when they actually tied for that 4th spot, and Penn advanced on a tiebreaker. So there's definitely some recent history between those teams, and I think it's going to continue with a new chapter again this season. So Penn, like I said, advanced into the Ivy tournament last year, but it loses 2 key pieces in its front court, including Jordan Obi, who is playing her graduate year at Kentucky. So there are lots of questions kind of similar to Princeton and Columbia about what the front court is going to look like. And then there was also recently a report from Ivy Hoops Online that sophomore guard Eseo Bebre, who I expected to be a big breakout player for them and probably start, is lost for the season due to injury. So Penn hasn't confirmed that, but assuming she's out, I think there's even more space for Penn to fill. I think this is one of the teams that I personally have the most questions about. They're going to rely heavily on sophomore point guard Matea Gale, who's the reigning Ivy League Rookie of the Year, and on senior forward Stina Almquist. And beyond those 2, it's kind of anybody's game as far as who steps up. I think you're going to want to watch for sophomore guard Abby Sharp to carve out a bigger role. And we'll see where they go from there. Their freshmen will probably need to contribute right away. So there's kind of a lot of room for growth and learning about that team, and I'm excited to see what they ultimately turn into. But there are some questions about how good they end up being. And then Brown, meanwhile, is they're on a multi-year kind of building process, and they're hoping that this year, the year that they happen to be hosting the Ivy tournament, is the year that they kind of hit their crescendo and make it in for the first time since 2017. They're losing their leading scorer from last year, Kyla Jones, who's playing her graduate year at Northwestern. Do you sense the theme yet about Ivy grad transfers going to power conference schools? And they're dealing with some injuries in their starting front court. But they've got, a bunch of scorers back, including Grace Arnoley, who's a former All-Ivy honoree, and Bella Mauricio, who's a really great three-point shooter. So, I'm excited to see kind of how their youth develops and steps up without Jones. And if I have to pick now, I would say that I think Brown is ready to take that next step, but we'll have to see them kind of, figure it out and make it happen without their leading scorer.
And, you've talked about who's coming back as well as some of the injuries. Is there anything else that should be considered in this 2-team race, or do we just need to wait until games get started and we see, how those injuries affect the team?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting battle. I think we'll learn a lot about these teams in the non-conference. Both are going to challenge themselves in different ways. I think for Brown, it'll be interesting to see whether they get Alyssa Moreland back, who's one of their forwards that I kind of alluded to she's out indefinitely right now. We don't have a reason given for her absence. So hopefully she'll be back at some point during the season, and that could be a big difference maker for Brown. So that's kind of an X factor to watch. And then I think it'll just kind of be a story of which team develops more during the year and kind of gels at the right time and is able to be consistent in Ivy play, because it's a gauntlet. They still do several back-to-back weekends, and teams have to be ready for that. They have to have experience with that. It's unique in the Ivy League. Not a lot of other conferences do that, let alone in the regular season. So it'll be a grind, and I'm curious to see how it plays out for sure.
And then Cornell has a new coach for the first time in quite a long time. What should we know about her?
Yeah, so Emily Garner is the new head coach for Cornell, which finished tied for last with Dartmouth last year in the Ivy League. Garner came from Division III Trinity and replaces longtime Cornell head coach Dana Smith, who's also a Rhode Island alum. Shout out to Natalie's A10. So Garner, 2 years ago, she took Trinity to the Elite Eight of the Division III NCAA tournament. So this is kind of a bet by Cornell on the Division III to Ivy League pipeline that brought us Carla Berube. And so we'll see if that pans out. She's really excited to be at Cornell and just kind of bringing a fresh energy, and she's kind of leading the way with defense. Trinity was known for its defense, and she hopes to bring that to Cornell, and she wants it to be up tempo. She wants to make teams uncomfortable. So that's what you should expect from Cornell. And obviously they're still getting used to their new head coach, but that's a team that could, that I think will get better over the course of the season too.
And what challenges is Garner expected to face this season?
Yeah, so, for any first-year head coach, there's always the challenge of getting players, comfortable with you, used to your system, that sort of thing. So she's definitely going to have that. She's doing that amid the strength of the Ivy League, which is one of the best conferences in the country. Last year it was right behind the Power Six conferences in measures of conference strength. She's going to be using some younger players in new spots. So, trying to build them up into, really solid, consistent contributors in the league. And then just as kind of the cherry on top, 9 of her 13 non-conference games are on the road. So they're going to be doing a lot of travel, and she's looking at that as a positive. She wants to teach them in the non-conference how to win on the road so they can win on the road in conference. But yeah, that's a little bit daunting for sure to start your first season at a Division I, in charge of a Division I program with that much travel.
And then is there a team that was predicted to be in the bottom 3 that could surprise some people this season?
Yeah, so the bottom 3 predicted in order this year, Yale at 6th, Cornell at 7th, and Dartmouth at 8th. And I think of that group, I would actually take Cornell and first-year head coach Emily Garner. They return a lot, the second most minutes and points in the league behind Harvard. And I think there's upside with this roster. I think as they get more comfortable with Garner, I think they could really put some things together. I think they've got the foundation. And Garner said at Media Day that she's focusing on the process over necessarily the results this season, but I think she could maybe get a few results too, which would be a nice way to start off.
And then we've kind of talked about everyone except Dartmouth and Yale. Can you just give the listeners a quick rundown of what's expected from them and kind of what the state of their game is?
Yeah, so Dartmouth is in year 2 under head coach Linda Simino, and they really struggled last year, but they kind of continue to be on that upward trajectory. They actually had a really good non-conference season relative to previous years, and then the Ivy League was tough for them. And so, I think they're just kind of plugging along, like doing the multi-year building process that the Ivy League has to do, because by and large, it doesn't get a lot of transfers and it's tough to rebuild quickly. So they're kind of on their way, but I don't think they're quite there yet to be a really big challenger to some of the other teams. But I think we're going to see progress and growth for sure, especially offensively, where they really struggled last year. Their defense was stingy, but their offense also struggled. And then Yale loses the most in the Ivy League, including its best player, Jenna Clark, who ran the point. So Yale's going to kind of approach that loss by committee and have a bunch of people kind of facilitate the offense. So curious to see what that looks like. And so they're just kind of like I mentioned with Penn. Like, I have a lot of questions about what Yale's going to be and how they're going to replace some of these losses. And that's just something we have to wait and see on. Head coach Dalila Ashe was super optimistic at Media Day, saying she's finally got the culture in a place that she likes it, that fits her after she's now entering her 3rd season. So she's optimistic, and I'm kind of in wait and see mode. Just I want to see what they look like now with a really new roster relative to the rest of the league.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, Jenn will share what she's looking forward to this season and some things to keep an eye out for. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. College basketball starts today, and it's not too late to bet on games between Mississippi and USC, as well as UCLA versus Louisville. You can also bet on who will win the WNBA championship in 2025 and who will win WNBA MVP in 2025 as well, all at FanDuel.com. So, Jen, we've talked about a lot of different teams, well, all the different teams, a lot of different players. Who are some of the Player of the Year frontrunners?
Yeah, so I mentioned a lot of these, but just running down the list real quick, I think Harmony Turner needs to be the favorite at this point as the first-team All-Ivy player returning. Being a player on a team that can contend for a championship never hurt anybody's Player of the Year candidacy either. Similarly, Madison St. Rose out of Princeton has won Ivy League honors before, including Rookie of the Year 2 years ago. She's a junior now, is expected to be Princeton's best player. And when you're the best player at Princeton, you tend to be a Player of the Year candidate. So I don't think that's going out on a limb to say that she's going to be in heavy consideration. I would probably peg her as Turner's biggest challenger right now. And then you've got the duo out of Columbia, Kitty Henderson and Cecilia Collins. And honestly, for them, like both are great players, but I don't know how you pick one over the other right now. And so that's where kind of the hesitancy with Player of the Year comes in, right? Like if you can't 100% say that someone's the best player on their own team, it's hard to vote for them for the best player in the conference. So we'll have to see, if one kind of establishes herself more in that race than the other, or how you split hairs between those two, because they're both excellent and super entertaining. And then I would also just say, depending on which team gets that fourth spot in Ivy Madness, as I expect things to go right now, someone on whichever team that is should probably be under heavy consideration. So if it's Penn, Matea Gale or Stina Almquist will probably be in the mix. And if it's Brown, probably Grace Arnoley in the mix for Player of the Year. But that's kind of a more wait and see, just to see how their teams do, because historically. Players on really good teams tend to get more consideration for Player of the Year. I went back through the data last year. So definitely the team results do matter here, even though it's an individual award.
And then, who can we keep an eye out for that might have a breakout season?
Yeah, so there are going to be a lot of sophomores on this list. The player I kind of wrote down first for myself is actually a junior. It's Katie Krupa from Harvard. And I'm not sure if she counts as a breakout candidate because she kind of had that last year. But I think there's kind of another level that she can reach. So maybe it's a breakout on top of a breakout for her. But I'm excited to see what she does. And I think, I think she could stand to get some more attention. She could break out from an attention standpoint. She has such great players around her that sometimes she flies under the radar a little bit. But she's a great player, and I think she's really going to step up this year. As far as kind of your more traditional breakout players, a lot of sophomores on this list. Riley Weiss from Columbia, who I mentioned, Sky Velker at Princeton. Also, you could probably quibble with that being a breakout player, given that she was a starter last year. But like I said before, I think she's going to take a big jump as a sophomore, just with a full year of comfort and experience under her belt. I mentioned Abby Sharp, guard at Penn. And then I'll throw out Brown sophomore guard Olivia Young. She hit a buzzer beater to win a game on Brown's foreign tour this summer, and she's going to have to step up offensively. She played regular minutes last year for Brown, but she's going to be relied on more offensively, and I'm curious to see how she adjusts to that and is able to produce.
And I've got my notebook out. What storyline should I be keeping an eye on that you're most excited to play out?
Yeah, so obviously, if Harvard wins the league, that would be the first time they do that since 2008. So that would be a great story. It's been a while for a program that used to win kind of year after year, along with Dartmouth, kind of the way that Princeton has been doing as of late. So that would be a really interesting story of kind of a temporary or permanent shifting of the guard up top. Similarly, if Brown makes Ivy Madness for the first time since 2017, that would be a great story and really kind of emphasize the building that has happened under head coach Monique LeBlanc, especially since Brown is hosting the tournament in Providence. That would be a fun little matchup. If Brown sneaks in as the 4 seed and is playing the 1 seed on Brown's home court, that is a bit of intrigue in that matchup. So I'm excited to see that for sure. I've mentioned a ton of sophomores on this podcast. Just thinking about the strength of the sophomore class across the Ivy League, I'm really excited to see what they do. And I'm sure there's going to be a sophomore I haven't mentioned who, also kind of surprises some folks. There are always players who surprise some folks in Ivy League play, and that's one of the most exciting things about covering the conference, in my opinion. And then, I'm also curious to see what that progress looks like for Dartmouth. I mentioned I think they're moving in the right direction, slowly, incrementally. And I'm excited to see what that next step looks like for them, kind of at more the beginning of their rebuilding process than a team like Brown might be. So what is that next step, and how do they build on last year's foundation?
And then again, I have my own notebook out, so I'm going to be taking some notes. What are some non-conference games that people should be circling on their calendar?
How many do you want me to give you? Because I could give you like 100. No, the Ivy League is playing a lot of challenging games out of conference, which is great. Coaches near the top of the league have talked about the importance of the league scheduling well in the non-conference to boost those all-important metrics for NCAA tournament selection. And we saw Columbia's, aggressive scheduling pay off with that at-large bid to the NCAA tournament last year, which was huge for the Ivy League. So I'll start with a game that's happening tonight, Monday. 3 Ivy League teams will play Indiana over the course of this season, which shout out Indiana. Thank you for your service in giving us some awesome non-conference games. Really appreciate it. But we've got Brown at Indiana tonight. And then on Thursday, Harvard heads to Indiana. So it's going to be quite a week over there. And then Columbia will play them later in the year. At a tournament. So that will be fun. Perhaps the best game of the night tonight, look at Columbia hosting Stony Brook. That's going to be a fun one. It's a rematch of last year's season opener, which Columbia lost. So they will be out for a little bit of revenge and also, kind of figuring out their life without Abby Shue, their shoeless life, on the fly. And then just a couple other, power conference matchups that I think are really cool. Princeton's heading out to Utah, which, if you recall, Princeton played Utah in the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. And luckily, Lynn Roberts wasn't so scared off by that matchup that she wasn't afraid to schedule them again this year. So that'll be a treat for us. And then we've got Columbia going to Duke, which is returning a non-conference game from last year. Yeah, and then I'll just shout out one more real quick. It's actually 2, but Harvard and Cornell will both play Northwestern, which has Brown grad transfer Kyla Jones. So that's like a conference game in the non-conference. So I'm excited to see that too.
And then, I just have to shout out Brown URI. I know URI is also playing Harvard and Princeton. UMass and Harvard are playing today, I believe, if I remember that correctly, and a couple other Ivy League matchups that I can't remember now off the top of my head. I think Fordham goes to Yale. Always love seeing those Ivy League A-10 matchups as well. Last question, what are you most excited to see this season?
I'm excited for all of it. I cannot wait. I'm so glad we're back. But I guess one thing I would say is just kind of seeing the strength of the league continue to prove itself. The Ivy League has kind of been beating this drum for a couple of years now that it is a really strong conference top to bottom. It's not just top heavy. And I'm excited for the league to keep showing that. And I'm excited to watch the really good basketball that proves that. So, and that's not just can Harvard win the league. It's what progress does Brown make? How does Cornell look under a new head coach? How does Dartmouth kind of keep building? Like all of those things can lift the conference, and even Princeton and Columbia, if they do win the conference again, like that too, like they're setting a bar that continues to lift the league. Like if they continue to be so good that everyone is chasing them for years, that lifts all boats too. So.
And then, thank you so much for joining me this season. Where can the people find you and your work?
Yeah, so you can find me and all of my friends at thenexthoops.com. Our Instagram handle at thenexthoops is down here below. And then you can find me on Twitter at Jenn Hatfield 1. That's Jen with 2 N's.
Awesome. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On NBA Daily Newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com and start your day with the all-new free Locked On NBA newsletter. And make sure to tune in this week to hear more from all of our great podcasters here at Locked On Women's Basketball.